So you got a lightweight cruiser like the Indian Scout, but you're thinking that you'd like more power or a bigger bike. Earlier this year, in 2021, Indian released their line of Chief bikes, all bigger, more powerful naked cruisers designed to compete with the biggest engines that Harley has to offer. Now you're thinking, should I upgrade? Well, stay tuned. I'm going to do my best to answer just that question. This isn't any official review of the Chief or the Scout. There's plenty of those to be found. The question I want to answer is it worth it to upgrade from the nimble Indian Scout or similar lightweight cruiser to the brawny Indian Chief? The short answer is, it depends. I recently had the opportunity to test ride the Chief Bobber Dark Horse, Indian's top-of-the-line Chief that clocks in at $19,000 MSRP. To get to the dealer, shout out to the great crew at Indian Motorcycle of San Diego, I rode my 2018 Indian Scout 60 with an aftermarket exhaust and performance intake. This offered me the chance to ride both bikes back to back so I could get a clear sense of the differences between the two. My first impression of the Chief was, what the heck is the kickstand doing so far forward? I had to stick my foot out almost to the front wheel to reach it. Not the end of the world, but odd. The bike is a little bigger between the legs, but not overwhelmingly so. It was an easy transition for me to move from the smaller Scout to the bigger Chief. The riding position itself didn't feel any different. If you're feeling cramped on the Scout, the Chief might offer a slight improvement, but not much. One of the biggest complaints about the Scout is its rock-hard seat. The Chief may not share the exact same seat, but it sure didn't fall far from the tree. I'm a thin guy, but even my skinny butt felt too big for the rock-hard seat on the Chief. I've got an upgraded seat on my Scout. It's far more comfortable and better fitting than the Chief's stock seat. If there's one thing that Indian should upgrade on both these bikes, it's the seat. Are you listening, Indian? Overall, the Chief felt more polished than the Scout. The shifting was smooth, both clutch and brake levers felt good in the hand. Finding neutral at a stop was easy. The instrument cluster offered way more information and was easy to use and read. I was able to change ride modes on the fly, even with my leather gloves on. A quick glance at the cluster told me both speed and RPMs. Unlike the Scout, the Chief has an actual fuel gauge. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that most Scout owners would consider upgrading for that feature alone. One thing the Scout is notorious for is the stiff suspension and bumpy ride. I swapped out the stock shocks for progressive 444s as quickly as I could after buying the bike. The Chief seems about the same as my Scout after the upgrade. It's overall a bit of a rough ride, though not unbearable. Hit a modest bump on the road and expect the bike to bounce you out of your seat. To be fair, I don't know how the preload was adjusted for the Chief. It may well have been set for someone far heavier than me, which would account for its stiffness. Regardless, if you're looking for a bike with a silky smooth ride, I don't think you'll find it here. Let's face it though, the reason most of us are interested in the Chief is because of its power. Specifically, the overflowing river of torque put out by its 1890cc engine. According to Indian, the engine puts out 120 foot-pounds of torque. That's a lot of vroom vroom, baby. Almost 170% more than the Scout. The Chief definitely puts it to work too. The bike has 3 ride modes, Touring, Standard, and Sport. Touring has the most mellow throttle response, while Sport is the most aggressive. I started out in Standard and spent most of the ride in it. Even in this intermediate mode, the Chief delivered plenty of acceleration and snap wherever I wanted it. I think that most riders would be happy to just leave the bike in Standard mode. But wait, there's more. In Sport mode, watch out. Twist the throttle too hard or pop the clutch, and the bike is liable to rip the bars straight from your hands. It's got punch like no bike I've ridden. If you want snappier neck acceleration from a slow roll, this is the cruiser for you. Even when rolling down the freeway at 60, the bike launched forward right on command. If you want raw low-end power, the Chief wins hands down over the Scout. The Scout scoots, but the Chief rules. That's not the end of the story though. Yes, the Chief has more power, a lot more power than the Scout. But it also carries a lot more weight. Not a big deal when blasting down the freeway. Where you feel it though is once you start heading into a corner. Right away I could feel the extra heft of the bike as I leaned into a turn. It definitely takes more effort to get the Chief to dip into corners. The specs tell the tale. The Scout weighs a relatively svelte 560 pounds, where the Chief sports a potbelly at 670 pounds. When it comes to maneuverability and handling, the Scout wins this round. One final note. The Chief, despite having an engine big enough to power a bulldozer at a drag race, has an exhaust note that's surprisingly tame. Yeah, you get a taste of that V-twin growl, but it's never going to turn any heads. I much preferred the stock sound of another Indian that I tested, the Chieftain Dark Horse. Its sound is much deeper and louder. If Indian installed the Chieftain's exhaust on the Chief, I could live with it. As it is now, if I were to buy one, a new stock exhaust would be my first upgrade. So, in the final analysis, would I switch? No. The Chief is definitely a much faster bike, but I'm perfectly happy with the speed and acceleration of my little Scout. Yeah, the Chief Bobber Scout is overall a better finished bike, but at $19,000 to the Scout's $12,000 MSRP, it's not that much better finished. What really kills it for me is the extra weight. I do enjoy riding my bike in the twisties. The extra power of the Chief won't help me there, but the extra weight will slow me down and make the riding a little less fun. The other thing to consider is that I've got my Scout 60 right where I want it. Nice loud aftermarket exhaust, performance intake, new seat, 2 different windshields for different occasions, new springs, top-of-the-line touring tires, etc., etc. If I were to buy the Chief, I'd definitely have to invest in a bunch of aftermarket upgrades. Figure at least another $3,000 to $4,000 just to get the bike where I wanted it. At some point, the price of power is too much to pay. I think the Chief makes sense if you want straight up the most amount of power you can get out of a cruiser. If you don't ride the mountains or canyons, then the extra weight isn't going to matter much. If you're choosing between a Scout and a Chief, I'd go with the Scout if you're looking for a fast, fun cruiser, or if you don't have much riding experience. I'd suggest the Chief if you're not willing to settle for anything less than a torquey Bronco that's ready to buck you to the asphalt. If you just have to upgrade from the Scout, however, well, I also test rode the Chieftain Dark Horse, Indian's full-fledged bagger. Now that's a bike worth upgrading to. Lots of power, comfy riding position, great sounding exhaust, and a sound system that makes you just want to keep cruising till the tank runs dry. But that's a different review. Stay safe and enjoy the ride.